Legend. The Storm Hag lives at the bottom of the lake, close to Presque Isle Peninsula. She is a hideous she-demon. Her yellow eyes shine in the dark like those of a cat. Her skin is pale, a shade of green. Her teeth are sharp and pointed like a shark, able to tear the skin off of her victims. They are also green, which gives her another less common name, Jenny Green Teeth. Her hands have long, pointed nails like talons that have a poison with which she can paralyze a poor soul with just one small prick. Her arms are long and strong, and they wrap around her victims, making it impossible for them to escape her flesh-hungry attack. The old legend tells that, like a siren before she attacks, she sings a quiet song over the waves that few have survived to retell. Traditionally, the song she sings, it goes like this. Come into the water, love, dance beneath the waves, where dwell the bones of sailor lads inside my saffron caves. And as soon as the seafarer hears this song, the Storm Hag attacks. She calls up a violent storm that tosses the crew of the vessel around so she can lurch up from the water and grab them with her long arms. Others tell that she waits the storm out, and when the sailors believe it is all calm, she rises from the waves, spinning lightning and winds with such force the entire vessel sinks in a few seconds. Local history has it that on a fall evening in 1782, an owler ship was caught in a bad storm on the lake and desperately tried to make it back to port. It tossed to and fro violently for more than an hour, and when it was in sight of land, the storm abruptly stopped. The clouds dissipated, and the moonlight from the full moon illuminated the water, and the sailors could see they were less than a mile from the northern edge of the peninsula and home. But without warning, the water next to the boat foamed, and the Storm Hag burst forth from the surface. She spewed venom and attacked the crew, unleashing her fury upon them. Within seconds, the ship and its crew were taken beneath the waves to their doom. Witnesses on shore apparently heard the screams of the sailors echoing across the lake just before the vessel completely disappeared. To this day, some of those who sail the lake near the isle claim to hear phantom screams of the victims who were taken long ago. Now, these legends seem the work of over-imaginative sailors until one looks at some very disturbing incidents documented within the last century. Our final story comes to us from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And after I go through the story, I'll share a first-hand experience. This is about the early American room at University of Pittsburgh's Cathedral of Learning. The article is titled, Does Pitt's Cathedral of Learning Host a Ghost? The early American room in the University of Pittsburgh's Cathedral of Learning is a spooky place, and not just because it's Halloween. Whereas the hall outside and commons room 3 floors below are bustling with collegiate activity, this wood-paneled ode to 17th century America is dark and quiet. The working spinning wheel and antique coin collection in opposite corners are wonderful pieces of Americana, and the room's 9-foot-long cooking fireplace, crafted more than 70 years ago from 200-year-old handmade bricks, is about as cool as they get. But it's what's hidden behind the massive structure and the ghost story that goes with it that may give you the willies. It's a decades-old tale that E. Maxine Bruns, who's served as Nationality Rooms Director since 1965, is eager to tell. To do that, we need to go to the heart of Room 328's haunted history. Opening a closet door to the left of the fireplace, she reaches around in the darkness until she finds a lever embedded in the wood. As she presses down, part of the wall swings open, revealing a hidden dogleg staircase to a bedroom loft almost no one knows is there. As she climbs the narrow, winding steps, an antique 4-poster rope bed with pretty red and green hand-stitched quilt comes into view. Bathed in a dim shaft of sunlight to the right is a small cradle. The strange goings-on started almost 30 years ago, shortly after Mrs. Bruns donated several of her grandmother's personal items to decorate the space, one of only 2 among the cathedral's 27 rooms not used as a classroom. Her grandmother, Martha Jane Poe, was a distant relative of writer Edgar Allan Poe. The 1878 wedding quilt that adorns the bed once kept her and her husband, Waitman Worthington McDaniel, warm in the early years of their marriage. One day while tidying up the loft bedroom, custodian John Carter noticed the cotton coverlet was rumpled. Smoothing it, he turned to go, only to hear a weird whoosh behind him. Turning around, he saw the quilt had been pulled down, and the pillow had an imprint on it. Like someone's head had just been on it, says Mrs. Bruns, nodding knowingly. Naturally, Mr. Carter didn't breathe a word of it to colleagues. Only crazy people believe in ghosts. Yet when he eventually spilled the paranormal beans a year or so later, he discovered he wasn't the only one who'd experienced something creepy in room 328. Mrs. Bruns ticks off the list. A group touring the room in the mid-90s smelled fresh bread. Mrs. Bruns ticks off the list. A group touring the room in the mid-90s smelled fresh bread baking in the brick fireplace. Another group found the baby cradle rocking when they entered the room, even though the sleeping area is roped off from the public. Others have felt cold spots or seen candles suddenly flare up. A psychic saw a woman with her hair pulled back and wearing an apron. Did we mention the room is always locked? Spookier still, says Mrs. Bruns, was the corn saga. Dried ears of corn she'd hung on a peg to the left of the first floor fireplace one day inexplicably fell to the floor, sending kernels flying in all directions. They'd been firmly secured to the 4-inch long piece of wood, so there's no way an animal could have done that. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Once word got around, people started following Mr. Carter into the room. Still, Mrs. Bruns wasn't convinced the room was haunted, until a photograph taken of her grandmother at age 16 mysteriously got cracked. Still, Mrs. Bruns wasn't convinced the room was haunted, until a photograph of her grandmother at age 16 mysteriously got cracked. It had been carefully wrapped inside a piece of cloth and placed inside a dresser drawer for protection during some repair work on the room's wide plank floors. It's now displayed on a table next to the bed, beside her grandfather's spectacles and Bible. More recently, custodian Floyd Clausen, who's responsible for cleaning the room during daylight hours and always locks the door behind him, admits, rather reluctantly, to having seen a dark shadow near the bed while he was climbing the stairs. It came out of the room and disappeared right in front of me, he recalls. Some people believe him, others don't, but fellow custodian Ruth Mullen, who was a half step behind him, is sure he's telling the truth. When he turned, I saw his face, she says. Floyd doesn't startle, so it had to have been something. She pauses and shoots a nervous smile. You just feel a sense sometimes in here. Mrs. Bruns has an inkling as to who the spirit might be. Grandma, of course, and why she would bother to visit. When Martha Jane Poe died in 1936, in Mrs. Bruns' bed no less, the farm she spent most of her life on in Grafton, West Virginia was gone, and her children were dispersed. I think spirits go where things are important to them, she says. With that in mind, Mrs. Bruns a few years back decided to spend the night at the foot of the rope bed in a sleeping bag. After settling into the darkness, she hollered this invitation to the great beyond. I'm here, Grandma. All alone now if you want to contact me. Apparently she did. As Mrs. Bruns was drifting off to sleep, she heard the swish of material above her 2 times. Then something crashed to the floor beside her head. Too scared to move, she lay for several long moments, waiting for, well, the courage to turn on her flashlight. Scanning the room, she discovered a water bottle she'd placed in her overnight bag had fallen off a chair and onto the floor. A coincidence? She thinks not. Grandma, you can have this damn room, she recalls shouting before packing up and heading home to her husband. Now, when I was in grade school, I can't remember whether this was elementary, junior high, or even high school. I think it was before high school, so maybe junior high, maybe elementary school days. Our school took us on a field trip to the Cathedral of Learning where we toured the nationality rooms. Now, this early American room is just one of the many themed rooms in the Cathedral of Learning at the University of Pittsburgh, and each room, of course, having a different theme. But when we went into the early American room, and as we toured it, the person who was giving the tour did also mention while we were in the room that it was rumored to be haunted, and that it, that there was a spirit of somebody in there, and she told us some of the stories. At that point, that's when she did what they talk about in the article here and revealed the hidden doorway. So she basically went over to the wall by the fireplace, hit the latch, and the door opened up, revealing a hidden staircase. So the tour guide was in front and had us all follow her. The tour guide took us up the steps up to the upper room. There was maybe about a dozen of us, and we went up the steps into the room, and the staircase was very narrow. And so I think the way it worked is like we had to all go up into the room and then start coming back down, because I don't think there was enough room to kind of go up and down the staircase at the same time. Well, anyways, the tour guide led us back down the steps, and when we got to the bottom of the hidden staircase, the door back to the main room had closed and locked itself shut. We were trapped in the secret stairwell. Now, the tour guide, I doubt would have naturally let that happen, being that this was pretty much her daily job to take tour groups in there. So this probably wasn't something that happened all the time, but somehow we went up there, and while we were up there, the door shut on its own and locked us in. And while cell phones did exist, this was really kind of predated a time where everybody just, had a cell phone on them. So we were stuck in there for a full hour. It was so hot and so small. We couldn't sit down. We were just standing on these staircases. We were stuck in there for an hour until the next tour group came through. And while the next tour group came through, we had to bang on the wall to get let out. I'm sure we gave the next tour group quite a startle. So kind of a neat local story, and kind of interesting to have had something out of the ordinary happen to us while on a tour and being told that it was haunted. So I hope you enjoyed these haunted Pennsylvania stories, and I hope you've been enjoying our 2017 Haunted Halloween theme. We have one more week of this theme left to go, and just a little bit of a tease. Our final episode on this topic will be about the hex murder, the Raymar Hollow hex murder, which is quite interesting, and you should definitely listen to the podcast, and then after we go through it, you can check out the documentary that's available for free if you have a Amazon Prime subscription. Just a few more notes. We are now on Google Play, so you can also subscribe there. And I'm going to miss the Haunted Halloween 2017 theme. We'll do it again next year, but I am looking forward to moving on to other topics. We have our first podcast, our first topic that we're going to release in November scheduled, and that's going to be about crop circles. And I have two co-hosts that are going to join me, so just a little bit of a tease on that, a sneak peek, if you will. I'm very excited for it. We've been doing a lot of research. It's going to be one where it should be research heavy. We're going to do a really good job, but I think this is going to be... I've been listening to a lot of podcasts about crop circles. Usually it's with crop circle people, certain particular aspects, but we're going to cover pretty much the history and the whole phenomena of crop circles. We're going to kind of give the definitive podcast overview of the crop circle phenomenon. So really looking forward to that. And that's pretty much it for tonight. I hope you'd enjoyed this podcast, and please subscribe, please share, and keep tuning in to the Reality Fred podcast.
We've been together for 1,000,000 shows, and I bet we'll be together for 1,000,000 more. Oh, it's like I started living when I discovered Fred, and I can't remember what I ever did before. What would we do, baby, without Fred? What would we do, baby, without Fred? There ain't no podcast like the Reality Fred podcast.